So, my video on Ridley Scott's Napoleon was a lot more popular than I anticipated. I guess I hoped for a couple hundred views, but as it passed 1,000, then 2,000, and even 3,000, I kinda got a high from it, especially with all the warm, positive, encouraging comments. I thought it would be a one-time thing, but with people subscribing and telling me to make more, and since I did rather enjoy it, I'm giving it another go. If you have suggestions for other movies for me to review, please let me know in the comments, and perhaps I'll do them. But for now, I figured I'd make some videos on another topic dear to my heart, the script of which I already had mostly written. This video is the first in a series about the F word, fascism. I wrote my college senior thesis in autumn 2021 on Italian fascism, and I plan on breaking that up into 5 episodes, one on young Italy, young Mussolini, the second on the fascist rise to power, the third on the structure of the fascist state itself, the fourth on its relations with the Catholic Church, and the fifth on its relations with Italian Jews, perhaps each a week apart. Some other YouTubers have already covered this topic decently well. Ryan Chapman's is pretty good, and Lavender's is excellent. I am sympathetic towards his monarchism, but my perspective leans a little more favorably towards fascism. Anyway, the best coverage on this topic is by Tick, who may be currently the best World War II historian on YouTube. His videos on Italian fascism in part inspired me to write about it as my thesis in the first place. And even though in this video I will often speak favorably of Mussolini and his fascism, I respect Tick's criticism of fascism more than anyone's, because he genuinely knows what he's talking about. A final caveat. Aristotle may not have actually written that it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it, but it's a darn good saying nonetheless. This video series is neither fascist propaganda nor anti-fascist propaganda. I hope that everyone who watches it learns something, and perhaps takes away something they admire about Mussolini, as well as something to despise him for. My job here is to present facts and a new perspective. What is your opinion about those facts is your business. Fascism is perhaps the most abused and least understood political term, to the point where most just know that it must be bad. George Orwell, who himself fought against the fascists in the Spanish Civil War, wrote in 1944, quote, "As used, the word fascism is almost entirely meaningless. I have heard it applied to farmers, shopkeepers, social credit, corporal punishment, fox hunting, bullfighting, the 1922 Committee, the 1941 Committee, Kipling, Gandhi, Chiang Kai-shek, homosexuality, Priestley's broadcasts, youth hostels, astrology, women, dogs, and I do not know what else." It is an unfortunate and inaccurate historical development that Italian fascism has been lumped in with German Nazism as evil and brutish. Historian Paul Gottfried recognizes that, quote, "Nazi tyranny resembled Stalin's rule more than it did other anti-communist national revolutions, such as Benito Mussolini's." These video essays will examine why the Italian people welcomed Mussolini to power and submitted to his rule, preferring him to their alternatives, the lethargic and inept Ancien regime on one hand, and a Marxist revolution on the other, and in what ways he united and transformed Italy with that power, both rejecting and embracing aspects of both the political right and left. To understand fascist Italy and its founder, Benito Mussolini, it is necessary to examine their youths. The Italian Risorgimento, resurgence or unification, culminated in the birth of the State of Italy in 1870, but did not accomplish all the goals it set out to achieve. The country remained economically pinched, elitist, oligarchic, and predominantly agrarian and backward compared with Northern Europe, and some Italian land remained under Austro-Hungarian Empire. Italy's African imperial colonial ambitions too were frustrated, ending in the greatest defeat of a European army by an African force in Ethiopia in 1896. There was also a religious divide, as the vast majority of the country was Catholic, but the popes considered themselves prisoners in the Vatican since 1870 and refused to recognize the secular, anti-clerical Italy as a state. The period between the Risorgimento and Mussolini's rise in 1922 was one of corruption, incompetence, and misunderstanding. Many Italians considered the Risorgimento and its aftermath la rivoluzione mancata, the unfulfilled revolution. Like Italy, Mussolini grew up under opposing influences. While Mussolini's Catholic mother Rosa insisted that he be baptized, his anti-clerical socialist father Alessandro named him Benito after Mexican socialist president Benito Juarez, Amilcare after Amilcare Ciparini, and Andrea after Andrea Costa, both Italian socialist revolutionaries. In the obituary Mussolini wrote for his father in 1910, he wrote that Alessandro had spent time in jail for organizing a local communist chapter, and that his house always offered friendship and shelter to those pursued by the authorities. Alessandro occasionally wrote articles for the local red newspaper, La Rivendicazione, and the police had record of him as a subversive. In fact, Alessandro took more interest in politics and socialist agitation than in his blacksmithing career, so that the family was kept out of overt poverty by Rosa's meager salary as a primary school teacher. When he was 10 years old, Benito's parents sent him to a boarding school in Faenza, run by Silesian monks. His mother as a devout Catholic, his father hoping the monks could discipline him. Benito was miserable and melancholy during his year there. The monks' rigorous discipline and enforced piety only solidified his disinterest and resentment to the Church, which he saw as corrupt and tyrannical, and to the Catholic God, if not the divine altogether. Benito also became more aware of class struggle during his time at the boarding school, which segregated rich from poor students. Inspired by his father, socialism would be his religion. In February 1901, at the age of 18, Mussolini made his first public speech at a ceremony at his public school. He, quote, lamented that the unification of the nation had produced only a bourgeois state, led by an egotistic ruling class, moved only by parochial and selfish interests, and incapable of fulfilling the promise of the Risorgimento, and asserted that what Italy desperately needed was a revolution. The Italian Socialist Party, daily newspaper Avanti, Forward, reported that this speech was much applauded. Once Mussolini graduated, his first attempts to apply to schools as a teacher were thwarted by his abrasive personality and character, always carrying a dagger and often getting drunk at bars, and by his dressing in the imposing all-black of the anarchists. But by December of 1901, he was hired by the local Socialist Council to be a schoolteacher, likely influenced by their respect for his father. After teaching for only 1 year, he left for Switzerland in early July 1902 to find his destiny, to avoid mandatory military service, and because he concerned his superiors with a revolutionary speech he gave at a teachers' conference. Mussolini did not have clear plans for Switzerland, and at first he lived in depression due to his poverty, was often ill from lack of food, was ill-groomed, and contemplated suicide. He worked a few days as a common laborer, quit, and was arrested for vagrancy. In 1903, however, he received a job writing for the local socialist newspaper, L'Avvenire del Lavoratore, attended union meetings, and read from many social philosophers. From Georges Sorel, he imbibed the justification of social violence and contempt for parliamentarism. From Machiavelli, political subtlety and aggression. From Friedrich Nietzsche, the Superman. He was an orthodox Marxist ontological materialist, opposing the monarchy, the military and mandatory military service, and the church as tools of the bourgeois capitalist status quo, holding the nation back from revolution. He once wrote, quote, "The experience in other nations shows us that universal suffrage does not solve the social question, and that universal suffrage is the oxygen bag which prolongs the life of the dying, namely, the capitalist bourgeois state." According to Angelika Balabanov, an influential Russian Jewish communist and a possible lover of Mussolini, quote, "He did not consider himself a proletarian, but as an intellectual, a leader." It was Balabanov who welcomed him into the world of Switzerland socialists, and Angelika Balabanov would become one of Mussolini's staunchest adversaries when he split from the socialists and formed the Fasci. It was in Switzerland, among fellow socialists, that Mussolini was first called Il Duce. He was the epitome of the red subversives which he would later so vehemently combat in his rise to power. Vladimir Lenin would later remark to Italian socialists in Moscow in 1921, quote, "Mussolini is the only man capable of leading a revolution in Italy. Why did you let him get away?" In 1904, King Vittorio Emanuele III passed a general pardon to all cases of military desertion, and at his mother's encouragement, Mussolini returned to Italy to serve. Despite his socialist passion against the military, church, and bourgeois capitalist state, Mussolini thrived during his compulsory time as a soldier, which lasted until September of 1906. He next took up a post as editor of Onoglia's socialist newspaper, La Lima, which a Swiss acquaintance offered him, by which he resumed attacking both the church and capitalism and called for the need for a revolutionary vanguard. In July 1908, he was arrested for leading laborers in a socialist riot, once and for all closing the door to him of any respectable career, leaving him to journalism and social agitation, which is where he excelled anyway. When in September 1908 he was arrested yet again for holding a political rally without police permission, he told the magistrate, quote, "I am not afraid of prison. My grandfather knew the Pope's prisons, my father those of House Savoy, and I know the prisons of the Swiss Republic and the Kingdom of Italy. I rate jail as an excellent diet for the reinforcement of moral discipline and the strengthening of the will, as well as the refreshment of the soul." In January 1909, Mussolini assumed the position of secretary of a trade union in Trent, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He was frustrated at the Trentans' contentment under foreign rule, and from this point on, his socialist writings increasingly took on nationalist sentiments. When Austrian police shipped him back to Italy on suspicion of plotting a rebellion, the Italian National Association newspaper hailed him as, quote, "a patriot, mistaken in his socialist ideas, but of an undoubted fervor." The Italian Nationalist Association would form an alliance with the Fascist Party in 1919 and was merged into, or annexed by them, in January 1923. In January 1910, Mussolini helped found another socialist weekly newspaper, La Lotta di Classe, the class struggle, in Forlì, Romagna. His ability to make previously stuffy socialist theory accessible and understandable to the common man made the newspaper quickly grow, and it became, as he described in his first autobiography, La Mia Vita, which he wrote while in jail in 1912, quote, "the organ of socialists in the entire province." In it, he advocated violence as the means of revolution, as preferable to the ballot box, inspired by Georges Sorel. In his own rise to power, he would use both means. In September 1911, Italy went to war with the Ottoman Turkish Empire to take Libya in another attempt at building a colonial empire. Considering this was Italy's second attempt at conquering African colonies, the record clearly shows that the desire for empire pre-existed fascism. While Mussolini desired the annexation of Trent, Trieste, and Nice as rightful Italian territory, terre irredente, he was opposed to what he saw as bourgeois capitalist colonial conquest in Africa. To his frustration, the moderate socialist leadership did not call a general strike to protest the war, so Mussolini and his hardline socialists held their own localized strike in Romagna. Reporting on his arrest at the end of the week-long strike, La Lotta referred to him as Comrade Mussolini. The protest strike failed to spread. To the general Italian proletariat, national loyalty was stronger than class loyalty, and there was general support for the war. This made an impression on Mussolini, and he would later change his tactics accordingly. When he was released from jail after 5 months, Mussolini and his sect rejoined the PSI with intent to repurify it. In the Italian Socialist Party, the PSI's 13th Annual Congress in July of 1912, Mussolini was elected to the new national executive and was given the editorship of the PSI daily newspaper, Avanti, stationed in Milan. When he came to Avanti, its circulation was 28,000, but he brought it up to 100,000 by December of 1914. He replaced the heavy ramblings of his predecessors with shorter articles. The headlines were bigger, vicious, hard-hitting, and funny, the content simpler, powerful, and punchy. Vladimir Lenin himself noted Mussolini's reform and rise with approval in his Vienna newspaper, Pravda, and Leon Trotsky referred to Mussolini even after his fascist revolution as, quote, our splendid pupil. Mussolini would hold this post for 2 years until the next turn of events sent him again into new territory. When World War I broke out in August 1914, socialist parties in France, Germany, and England, even Lenin in Russia, supported it rather than opposing the war like Marxist theory suggested. They did this because they discerned the war would weaken all the capitalist imperialist bourgeois states and usher in the world revolution. The PSI was the only European socialist party that opposed the war, holding on to the traditional international socialist class war theory. Mussolini, however, again saw nationalism proving a stronger unifying force than class identity, and urged that Italy should follow suit and join the war, quote, that by bloodshed we may bring the revolution nearer. World War I is what changed Mussolini from an international to a national socialist, a tactical change more than a dogmatic one. He envisioned the entire nation of Italy as the proletariat, which he would lead in revolution. For this change, Mussolini was kicked out of the PSI and removed from his editorship of Avanti. When invited to defend himself, he addressed the PSI, quote, you hate me today because you still love me, but you will not lose me. You have not seen the last of me. 12 years of my life in the party are, or ought to be, a sufficient guarantee of my socialist faith. He joined a minor syndicalist, or trade unionist party, the Fascio Rivoluzionaria di Azione Internazionalista, and rose to be its leader, rebranding it, dropping the international part for, quote, the Fasces of Revolutionary Action. Mussolini and some loyal friends founded their own National Socialist newspaper, Popolo d'Italia, the daily organ of fighters and producers, in November, preaching joining the war, as Italy did in May 1915. He and his fellow fascisti, still socialist, but now nationalist and anti-communist, worked on, quote, destroying faith in Karl Marx. The sale of Avanti dropped by 25,000 within days of the publication of Popolo d'Italia, as his readers changed subscriptions to follow him. Mussolini left Popolo d'Italia in the hands of his friends when he was called up and sent to the Austrian front in September of 1915. He served in the front trenches for 9 months and participated in the Second Battle of the Isonzo. He often wrote articles on the front and sent them back to be published. In his 1928 autobiography, he wrote, quote, I had been the most tenacious believer in the war. I had fought with all my warm soul of Italian and soldier. And he was promoted to corporal in March 1916 with the citation, quote, Benito Mussolini, ever the first in operations of courage and audacity. He was wounded in a grenade accident in March 1917, and when his wounds healed, he returned to Italy to encourage patriotism and support for the war. In the Popolo d'Italia article of 15th December 1917, Mussolini coined the word trencherocrazia, or trenchocracy, meaning veterans, and referring to them as a class in their own right. He wrote that after the war, Italy would be divided not between proletariat and bourgeois, but between, quote, those who fought and those who did not fight, those who produced and parasites. Thus, he still purported a for-against dichotomy, but one that reached across traditional class lines. Despite being on the winning side of the war, Italy did not reap the benefits which many Italians believed she deserved. Italy went to war on the Allies' side, not for any particular love or loyalty to Britain or France, but to unite Italian-speaking lands then under the Austrian Empire, including Dalmatia, the natural borders which Dante had prophesied and defined in the 14th century, and which had once been part of the Republic of Venice. These territories, as well as some land in Africa, were promised to Italy by Britain and France in the Treaty of London. American President Woodrow Wilson, however, overrode this agreement in the Treaty of Versailles. The 9th of his 11 points was for borders to be drawn along ethnic lines, and much of Italian-claimed territory was by then majority Slav or German. Wilson allotted to the newly formed Yugoslavia parts of the Austrian Empire, such as Trent, that had been promised to Italy, and did not give Italy any additional African possessions. by occupying a great deal of the Austro-Hungarian forces and suffering over 500,000 Italian lives, many Italians believed the Allies could not have won without them, and that they were being cheated from their share of the spoils. They began calling the war La Vittoria Mutilata, the mutilated victory. Well, I hope you enjoyed that video. I hope you learned some things. Please let me know your thoughts in the comments, as well as any movies you want me to review, and I'll try to upload the next episode as soon as I am able. Thank you very much. All the best. Until next time.